So now remember, this part's a review. So let's suppose you want to graph. Let's do number one. We want to graph this line, y equals 2 fifths x minus, let's say, 6. All right, 2 fifths x minus 6. Now, there are a couple of ways you can do this. You now know a couple of ways to graph this. You can graph it using a t-table. And now you can graph it using what? Slope and Y-intercept, because this is already in what form? Slope-intercept form. So we'll do it both ways, because the directions in your test could say do it one way or the other. So you need to know how to deal with this both ways. So let's do this using a t-table first. So if I do a t-table, I have to use numbers that are divisible by 5. Now you don't have to, but you can end up with fractions. So to make things easier on yourself, use numbers divisible by the denominator 5. What number should you always use? 0. So if x is 0, what's 2 fifths times 0? And 0 subtract 6 is? Negative 6. So there's one of your points. So I'm going to apply the point 0, negative 6, which is here. And then I just need one more point. So give me another value for x that will make things a lot easier for me. 5. So if x is 5, I get 2 fifths times 5 minus 6. The 5's divide out. So this part right here, that product's 2, and 2 subtract 6 is negative 4. So I plot the point 5, negative 4. So 5, negative 4 is right here, and then you just draw your line. So this is the line I'm drawing right here. Don't forget the arrows. Okay, so this is the line. Y equal 2 fifths x minus 6. Okay? All right, then, again, you could have done this using slope and intercept. So if you want to use it doing slope and intercept, what's the slope? What's the slope? 2 fifths. Not 2 fifths x, right? Even have to mention that several times. Some of you still turned in something with 2 fifths x as the slope. It's only 2 fifths. What's a y-intercept? Negative 6. So if I'm going to use the slope in the y-intercept, I must plot which point first? The y-intercept. So you would plot this point right here, and then you would use the slope in terms of rise over run. And so you'd say I would go up 2 and then to the right what? 5. So you get that point right here. Okay? Oops, I'm sorry. I used the wrong one. You go up 2 and then to the right 5, and you get that point right here. All right? Now, if you keep going up 2, see how I ended up getting a point on the graph? It kind of makes sense because the slope is what? 2 fifths, right? So no matter which 2 points I use on the graph, what should the slope be? What should the slope of this line be? 2 fifths. So if I go here and go 2 to the right 5, and then up 2 to the right 5, and then up 2 to the right 5, don't I get the same line? Yes. Yeah. So if I went down 2 to the left, I still get points on that line. Remember I said I went down 2 to the left, right? Kind of makes sense because I could also write this right here as a negative 2 divided by what? Negative 5. Because it's still what kind of number? Positive. All right? Okay, so this was you given the equation and you having to do what? graph it. All right, what's going to happen now is that, and here's the idea, is that you will be given the line you'll be given the line, let's say it's this line here, and you have to find the equation. Before you're given the equation, you had to do what? Graph. Here you're given the graph, you have to find the equation. All right, so that part's going to be on test 3. So let's talk about how to find the equation of a line given certain information. So if you're going to find the equation of a line, and you're going to end up wanting to write this in what form? Slope-intercept form. So if you're going to write the equation of a line, you will use something called point slope form. Point slope form. Now I'll give you the formula, you just need to know how to use it. All right, so here's what point slope form looks like. If you're going to use it, you have to know a point and the slope. Okay? Point, and what else do you need to know? Slope. All right, so it looks like this. Y minus y1 equals the slope times x minus x1. That is point slope form. That point, the word point that you see, this right here, that's going to be your x1, y1. And then the slope, that's going to be what letter? Now here's where it comes from. It comes from the slope formula. It's going to kind of remind you about the slope formula. What's the slope formula? y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, right? And so to use the slope formula, you've got to know how many points. So if I'm going to find the slope, I need to know how many points in that line. 2. All right? I got to know 2 points. Well, remember in a previous course, when you were asked to solve, let's kind of do this here. All right, a previous course, you're asked to solve this equation. And I'm going to make it simple to deal with. 2/5 equals x over 7, let's say. How do you solve that equation? You could find the LCD. That's not what I want you to do, though, but you could have. The LCD would be what? 35, multiply both sides by 35? So what else could you have done with this? Cross multiply. You can cross multiply because you have a proportion. A proportion is where you have one fraction equal to one fraction. All right. Now that cross multiplication only applies if it's a proportion. What you had in your test, your first test where you had to find the LCD, those are not proportions. So you couldn't do this. So you can use either the LCD, multiply both sides by 35, or you can just cross multiply. 5 times x, 7 times 2, so what's x? 14 over 5, right? Okay. So if you go back to this slope formula then, I can write m as m divided by what? I already wrote it. M divided by 1. don't I have a fraction equal to a fraction? So can I just cross multiply? Yes, you can cross multiply. It's a proportion. So I can say 1 times y2 minus y1 is what? Y2 minus y1. Anything times 1 is itself. Equal m times what? Doesn't it kind of look like this? Okay. So then what we do now, because remember when writing an equation, you have to have the letter y and the letter x involved. So what we do instead, and since we only need 1 point, we just rewrite the y2 as just y minus y1 equals the slope times x minus x1. And that's this right here. All right, so if you're going to write the equation, so anyway, that's where the slope formula, that's where the point slope formula comes from. It comes from the slope formula. You just cross multiply, and there it is. Okay, so this right here, this line right here, I want to find the equation of this line. To find the equation of this line, I've got to use what formula? Point slope. Well, in order to use point slope, what must I know? A point on that line, and there are infinite points on that line, but I know how many of them? 2. It does not matter which one you use. It does not matter. What else must you know? The slope, which I don't know. All right, so here's the idea. The direction is going to say something like this. It will say, all right, it will say, write the equation of a line with the given conditions. Okay, write the equation of the line with the given conditions. Write the equation in both point slope form and Y-intercept form. Slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form. All right, so write the equation of the line with given conditions. I'll give you the conditions. And then you're going to write the equation and write your answers in 2 ways, point slope form and slope-intercept form. All right, so let's go back to the one we were just talking about. So the one I just gave you is this. Number 1, the line contains the points we had said 5, 6. That's the line 5, 6. I mean, that's the point 5, 6. And the other point, let's say, is negative 5, 2. All right. Okay. So I'm going to find the equation of that line. So if I'm going to find the equation of the line, I've got to somehow put 2 things into what form? Point slope form. And what 2 things must I put into this point slope form right here? Point and slope. Well, what is it I don't know? The slope. So we got to find the slope. What's the slope formula? So first, find the slope. Now remember, in finding the slope, you may want to write this as x1, y1, x2, y2. What's the slope formula? Y's, rise over run, so your y's are in the numerator. Y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. And then you just substitute. So the first find the slope. So the slope will equal, what's y2? What's y2? 2. I subtract y1, which is what? 6. Now since I started with y2, I have to start with x2. The order matters. What's x2? Subtract x1, which is 5. What's the numerator? What's the denominator? Huh? Negative 10. And what's this reduced? 2/5. So I found the slope. The slope is what? 2/5. That's the slope. And now all I need is 1 point. It does not matter which one I use. You want to use the first one? We'll do it both ways just to show you that it does not matter. So the second step is this. Substitute m and x1, y1 into the formula. All right. Again, it does not matter which point you use. Let's use the first one to begin with. So I'm going to use this point. So I'm going to use 5, 6. So this is my x1, this is my y1. Remember, you got to substitute for x1, y1, not xy, x1, y1. All right, so here we go. Y minus y1, what's y1? 6, equals the slope, which is what? 2/5 times x minus x1. What's x1? 5. All right, so that's where I'm at. So remember the direction says write it both ways, point slope form, and what's the other way? Slope-intercept form. So you're going to have 2 blanks. One of them, in this case, it would say 2 blanks. So one would be point slope form. And that's point slope form, so you just rewrite it. Y minus 6 equals the slope times x minus 5. All right? So in my math lab, they're going to ask you to write it both ways, point slope form and slope-intercept form. So that's your point slope form right here. All right, now let's write this in slope-intercept form. Remember, slope-intercept form is where you get what variable by itself? Y. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and distribute the 2/5. Distribute the 2/5. And so I get y minus 6 equals, what's 2/5 times x? What's 2/5 times a negative 5? Negative 2, very good. So 2/5 times a negative 5, the 5's divide out, and you're left with 2 times a negative 1, which is a negative 2. And then one more step and you're done. What's the next step to get y by itself? Add 6 to both sides. And so you get y equals 2/5 x, that's a 5, plus what? 4. There's your slope-intercept form. So y equals 2/5 x plus 4. Okay? So this right here, guys, right here, I'm going to cover this up for a moment. This line has what equation? Y equals 2/5 x plus 4. And it kind of makes sense because, look, where does the graph cross the y-axis? At 4, and that's your y-intercept. Okay? All right, so and let me go ahead and do it using the other point, just to show you get the same answer. So if you use the other point, let's use the other point instead. So suppose someone else wanted to use the other point. So let's use the other point. All right, so the other point was negative 5, 2. All right, so again, this is going to be your x1, this is going to be your y1. So I get y minus y1. What's y1? 2 equals the slope. What's the slope? 2/5 times x minus x1. What's x1? -5. Okay, now listen carefully. When you put this in point slope form, I expect you to remember that x subtract a -5 means what? X plus 5, so you got to rewrite it. Don't leave it like this. Don't leave it as a double negative. So y subtract 2 equals 2/5 times x plus 5. So that's your point slope form. All right, now let's go ahead and get y by itself. Let's write this in slope-intercept form now. So I'm going to distribute. Oh, let me go ahead and rewrite this. So that's y minus 2 equals 2/5 times x plus 5. Don't distribute with it looking like this, because you are going to mess up. You must rewrite x subtract a -5 as what? X plus 5. Then you distribute. So if I distribute, I get y minus 2 equals 2/5 x. And then what's 2/5 times a positive 5? It's just 2, right? So plus 2. And then finally, one more step and you're done. What's the next step? Add 2 to both sides. And so I get y equals 2/5 x plus 4. And that was the answer. Remember the answer that right here? All right. So does it matter which point you use? That's a question. No, it does not matter. You can use any point on that line. All right. Now, let's look at number 2. Suppose, same directions, so I'm going to write, so the directions were these, remember the directions. Write the equation of the line with the given conditions and write the equation in both point slope form and slope-intercept form. All right, so number 2, here are my conditions. Number 2, the line passes through the points, and let's say my points are -6, 2, and -1, -4. So -6, 2, and -1, -4. So if I'm going to write the equation of a line, of this line, I've got to use what formula? Point slope formula. So I must use point slope formula. And so the formula is y minus y1 equals the slope times x minus x1. So if I'm going to use this formula, I've got to know 2 things. What 2 things must I know? The slope and what else? 1 point. How many points do I know of? 2. Doesn't matter which one I use. Does it matter which one I use? No, we just saw that. Huh? Oh. All right. But I've got to find the slope. So step 1 is to find the slope. So you've got to find the slope. All right. So I'm going to call this x1, this y1, and this x2, y2. So the slope is y2 minus y1. What's y2? -4. Subtract y1, which is 2, divided by, since I start with y2 rather, I've got to start with x2. What's x2? Subtract -6. All right. Now, what's a negative 4 and a negative 2? Negative 6. Now, in the denominator, this negative 1 subtract negative 6 really means negative 1 plus 6, which is what? 5. So there's my slope. So my slope is negative 6 fifths. All right, so then I take that slope and one of the points and I plug it into the formula. So which point do you want to use? I'm not going to do both of them this time. I'm just going to use one. You tell me which one you want to use. The first one? All right. So, so now we're going to substitute into the formula. All right. So remember, we're going to use this point, negative 6, 2. But again, it did not matter. So here's this is my x1, this is my y1. So y subtract y1, what's y1? 2 equals the slope, which is negative 6 fifths times x subtract x1, which is negative 6. All right, now with regards to point slope, what are you going to write right here? Y minus 2 equal negative 6 fifths times what? X plus 6. All right. So I'm going to rewrite this right here. I'm going to go ahead and don't distribute this negative 6 fifths, yes, because you got to rewrite this parentheses, this expression. So y minus 2 equals negative 6 fifths times x plus 6. Now distribute. Now you may need your calculator at this point. It's not as easy as the previous one. So if I distribute, I get y minus 2 equals negative 6 fifths x. All right, now what's a negative 6 fifths times 6? Huh? Negative 36 over 5, right? Negative 36 fifths. Because a negative 6 times 6 is a negative 36. 5 times 1 is 5. So that's what that is. So this becomes minus 36 fifths. And now, one more step and you're done. What's the next step? Add 2 to both sides. So when I combine like terms, this is 0 right here. So I get y equals negative 6 fifths x. All right, now use your calculator in this part, unless you want to do it by hand. So when using a calculator, in your calculator, you're going to substitute all right, so you're going to substitute negative 36 divided by 5 plus what? 2. You're going to then do what? Press. Come on, guys, y'all had this last semester in terms of using your calculator with fractions. Okay, but it's written as a decimal. I need for you to rewrite it back as a fraction. So what do you press up here? Second, PRB, and then press what? Equal, and what do you get? Negative 5 and what? 1/5. All right, so this right here is negative 5 and 1/5. But then you got to rewrite this. Now, this is a mixed number, so you got to rewrite this back as an improper fraction. So negative 26 over 5. All right. Know how to use your calculator. Otherwise, you're going to have to do this by hand. So here's what you would have to do by hand. Let me show you. So I'm trying to add negative 36 fifths plus 2, right? But 2 I can write as 2 divided by what? 1. So you got to find your LCD. What's the LCD of 5 and 1? 5. So now you're going to write equivalent fractions, meaning that you want this fraction to be equivalent to a fraction that has that same denominator. That has 5 as a denominator. Well, if the denominators are the same, then what does that mean about the numerators? They have to be the same. Over here, though, the denominator is not the same. So what can I multiply this 1 by to get this LCD? 5. But what I do to the denominator, I've got to do to the numerator. So 2 times 5 is 10. So 2 is equivalent to 10/5. Now I add these two fractions because they have the same denominator now. What's negative 36 plus 10? Negative 26. And then don't say 5 plus 5 is 10. You got to keep the denominator. What's the denominator? And that's what we had. All right, so if you don't know how to use your calculator, then you are going to have to do this by hand. Okay? Now, let me show you another way you could have done this. I'm going to go back right here. See this little part right here? I'm going to go back here. So I have y minus 2 equals negative 6/5 times x plus 6. You see how that might have been about 2 or 3 of you, I'm just estimating here, that had difficulty dealing with these fractions, even using a calculator? Here's what else you could have done. Think about what you did on test 1. I have an equation with a fraction. What did you do? You had an equation with a fraction. What did you do? You multiply both sides by the LCD. That's going to be on test 2, right? Equation with fractions? Okay. What is the LCD? 5. So then if you remember what we did was, since this was more than one term, we put that in parentheses. So you say y minus 2 equal, and then negative 6/5 times x plus 6. So I'm going to multiply this by 5, and I have to do what? Multiply that by 5. So notice times 5 times 5. Now if I distribute here, what does that become? Okay, and then what happens here? The 5s divide out, and then you'll just be distributing what number? Negative 6. And so what's negative 6 times x?
Negative 6x.
And then negative 6 times 6? Couple more. So you see, I no longer have fractions. Couple more steps and you're done. What's the next step? No, always do division last. Add 10 to both sides. So 5y equal negative 6. And what is this right here? So it's a negative 26. Which is what this was, right? This numerator. And then finally, what's the next step? Divide by 5 and write it as two fractions. So I get y equals negative 6 what?
6x over 5.
Or negative 6/5 x. And then minus 26 divided by 5. And that's what we had here. So either approach is fine. You really need to know both. Because this approach involves what you learned on the first test, clearing fractions. All right, so let's do another one. Now notice, this was a little bit more complicated than the previous one we did. Because the previous one we did, what happened in the previous one, if you go back, when I distributed the 2/5, this was just an integer that it ended up with. It was just 2. That made things a lot easier. But here, or here, that's not an integer. It's a rational number. So I'm going to end up with a rational number. All right, let's do one more with the points, and I'm going to try and make them fractions again. All right, number 3, the line contains the points and let's say the points are negative 4, 2, and negative 7, negative 5. So negative 4, 2, and negative 7, negative 5. So you're writing the equation of the line that goes to those 2 points. So what are you going to use? What formula are you going to use? Point slope formula. What is it?
Y1 equals M X minus it.
Okay? And in order to use this formula, I've got to know 2 things. What 2 things must you know? The slope, which I don't know, and a what? Point, which I do know. It does not matter which one you use. So let's find the slope first. So the slope equals, let's label this x1, y1, x2, y2. So the slope is y2 subtract y1, so it's y2. Negative 5 subtract 2. Since I started y2, I've got to start with x2. What's x2? Subtract negative 4. What's the numerator? Okay. The denominator is negative 7 plus 4, which is negative 3. What else do you need to do? Rewrite negative 7 over negative 3 as what? 7/3. You need to know that a negative divided by negative is a positive. Okay, so I know the slope and I know a point. So now you just substitute those 2 things into the formula. All right, which point do you want to use? The second one? Okay, so let's use the second one. So we're going to use negative 7, negative 5. So this is going to be my x1, this is going to be my y1. So I get y subtract a what? Negative 5 equals the slope. What's the slope? 7/3 times x subtract a what? Negative 7. So that's where I'm at. Now you don't want to leave it like that because you need to rewrite that subtracting a negative number as an addition problem. So this becomes y plus 5 equals 7/3 times x plus 7. So in my math lab, this would be point slope form. That would be the answer you would write. Okay, so use this as your answer. All right, now you got to write your answer in slope-intercept form though. So that's where you do what? Well, the idea is to do what though? Get what letter by itself? Y by itself. Okay, so there are multiple steps you can take. You can distribute or you can multiply both sides by the LCD if you don't want to have to deal with fractions. But you have access to a calculator, so it may be quicker just to distribute. So let's go ahead and distribute. When I do that, I'm going to get y plus 5 equals 7/3 times x is 7/3 x. What is 7/3 times 7? 49 divided by 3. All right, one more step and you're done. What's the next step? Subtract 5. And so I get y equals 7/3 x. Now let's use a calculator, and then we'll do it by hand. So in the calculator, what do I punch in? What do we punch in? Come on. 49 divided by 3, then do what? Subtract 5, and then do what? Enter or equal. So you get this decimal. But you got to write your answer as a fraction. So what must you do? You got to change this back to a mixed number. So it'll be second PRB. See how it has fraction to decimal? That F to D means fraction, decimal, decimal, fraction. What do I press though? Enter, equal, and I get this mixed number. So what is this mixed number right here? 11 and what? 1/3. Now, how do you change a mixed number back to an improper fraction? You say 3 times 11 is 33 plus the numerator 1 is 34. So this is 34 divided by 3. And there's your slope-intercept form. All right, so you found the slope. So from here, you can tell me the slope. What's the slope? 7/3. And where does it cross the y-axis? 34/3 or 11 and what? 1/3? Now, let's do this by hand, just in case someone went through your book bag and took your calculator. So on the test, you'd have to do it by hand. So you say 49/3 subtract what? 5, and write 5 is 5/1. What's the LCD? 3. So I'm going to write two fractions with 3 as the denominator. And I'm going to find those equivalent fractions. This is already a 3, so this numerator is going to be what? So 49/3 is equivalent to itself. Now I've got to find out 5 is equivalent to what fraction divided by, with what fraction as 3 is the denominator. Right. I mean, it kind of makes sense because what's 15/3? 5. All right, so what you did though is you'd say 1 times 3 is 3, 5 times 3 is 15. Now what's 49 minus 15? 34, and you have 34/3, which is what this was. You could have also, at this point right here, let me go ahead and draw this like this. You could have also instead of distributing, you could have done what instead? Multiply both sides by the LCD to clear the fractions. What's the LCD? 3. Now remember, you got to remember some things from that first test. So you're going to have to put this in parentheses, y plus 5, and you're going to say times 3. And then over here, you're going to say 3 times, and then this side, 7/3 times x plus 7. So remember, all I did, see those two sides? What must I do to those two sides right here that you're looking at? Multiply both sides by 3. So times 3 times 3. Now over here, though, I've got to get rid of the parentheses I just put. So that's a distributive property. So what does that become?
3y plus 15.
Equal, these 3's divide out, and now you can distribute a what?
2x plus 15.
That's 7. It's a 7.
It's
7x plus 49. You remember the 49? Where was it? Right here? There's that 49. A couple more steps and you're done. What's the next step? Subtract 15. What's 49 minus 15? 34 here. There's that 34. And it kind of makes sense because you see this right here. Look my equivalent fractions. 49 minus what? 15. That's what you see here. They're all related. So that's what? Plus 34? And then finally the next step is to do what? Divide by 3. And I'll just go ahead and write as two fractions. So you get y equal 7/3 x plus 34 divided by 3. All right, that's what we got here. All right, now let's look at the next one. The next one's going to be, I'm not going to give you the 2 points. It'll be something else I'll give you. So let's look at this one. So for number 4, let's suppose that you're told that so let's suppose that the line contains the point -8, 5, and has slope equal to -3/4. So it contains that point and it has that slope. So I'm going to ask you, which one do you think is going to be easier, the first three or this one? This one. The first three you had to do what? Find the slope. Here, what do you notice? Slope's already given. So it's just plug and chug. What's the formula?
Y equals.
No. Y minus y1 equals the slope times x minus x1. So in this case, though, you're only given 1 point, so you have to use it. The previous one, you were given 2 points, and it did not matter which one you used. So this has to be x1, and this has to be y1. All right, so here we go. Y minus y1, what's y1? 5 equals the slope, which is negative 3/4 times x minus a negative 8. Now go ahead and rewrite that x subtract the negative 8 to x plus 8. Now, in the first problem we did in number 1, when I distributed right off, that constant was an integer. The other two, they were fractions. Here, though, if I distribute the negative 3/4, you see that 4, the denominator 4, doesn't that reduce in the 8? All right, so it's easier just to distribute. I'm not going to have any fractions. Let me rephrase it. I'm going to have a fraction for the slope, but I'm not going to have a fraction for when I distribute with this constant. So again, y minus 5 equals negative 3/4 x. All right, so let's figure out what the negative 3/4 times 8 is. The 4 into 4 is 1. 4 into 8 is 2. So what's a negative 3 times 2? So that's what this becomes. So negative 3/4 x minus 6. I don't have to use a calculator with this one. One more step and you're done. What's the next step? Add 5 to both sides. And so I get y equals negative 3/4 x minus 1. So your slope-intercept form, what's the answer? Yeah. There's a slope. So there's your slope-intercept form. For point-slope form, make sure you put the right one that I want for point-slope form. Technically, these two right here are in point-slope form, but I don't want you leaving it as x subtract the negative 8. I need for you to give me the one where it says x plus 8. So what will you give me for point-slope form? Times x plus 8, yes. That's the one you'll give me. All right, so remember, these two right here are actually point-slope form. But I need you to rewrite when you have a x subtract or y subtract a negative number, rewrite that as x plus or y plus. All right, number 5. Number 5. Let's suppose this time, that it has slope equal to negative 5/7, and it passes through 4/6. So it has a slope negative 5/7, and it passes through that point. Remember, in order to use point-slope form, what do you think is supposed to know? Slope and a point. Do I know both? Yes. So just plug and chug. But you remember, it's a good idea to label that point. How are you going to label this point? x1, y1. So my formula, my point-slope formula is y minus y1 equals the slope times x minus x1. So y minus y1, what's y1? 6 equals the slope. What's the slope? times x minus 4. So there's your point slope form. So that's what you would tell me for point slope form. So y minus 6 equals the slope times x minus 4. Now, if you want to use your calculator, then what's the next step? Distribute. So in a distribute, I get y minus 6 equal negative 5/7 times x is a negative 5/7 x. A negative times a negative is a positive. But what is a negative 5/7 times a negative 4, though? What is it? A negative 20 over 7. Okay. Positive. Thank you. Positive 20 over 7. One more step and you're done. What's the next step? Add 6 to both sides. And then combine like terms. So y equals negative 5/7 x. If you want to use your calculator, use your calculator. What do I punch into the calculator? What do you punch in? 20 divided by 7 plus 6, and then press equal. So I get this decimal. Then you say second PRB, so F to D, D to F, so fraction, decimal, decimal, fraction. And then what do? Press equal, and there's my mixed number. So 20/7 and a positive 6 is 8 6/7. 8 6/7. But don't leave it as a mixed number. You need to rewrite it back as an improper fraction. So what's 8 times 7? 56. And what's 56 plus 6? 62? All right. And there's your answer. Okay, so that's slope-intercept form. Are any questions? Now, if you want to do this by hand, if you didn't have access to your calculator, at this point you would have said 20 divided by 7 plus 6 divided by 1. What's the LCD? 7. So you're going to write equivalent fractions with 7 as the denominator. These denominators are the same, so these numerators have to be the same, because really you're saying 7 times what? 1, and then 20 times 1 is 20. Here, 1 times what? 7. 6 times 7 is 42, and you get what? 62/7. Okay? All right, number 6. Suppose that it passes through negative 3, 5 and has x-intercept of 5. Do I know the slope this time? No. In order to find the slope, do I need to know how many points? 2. Do I know 2 points?
Yes.
Yes. The x-intercept is a point, isn't it? The problem with some of you is that when you do the ordered pair, you have issues with that. You got to make sure you put the 0 in the right place. So in terms of if you look at this in terms of a coordinate grid, the x-intercept of 5 is here. That's why the graph does what? Crosses the x-axis. Well, if that's 5 right here, how do you write that as an ordered pair? 5, 0. Not 0, 5. 5, 0. So you got to rewrite this as 5, 0 now. And now this becomes numbers 1, 2, and 3. So now you do this like you did 1, 2, and 3. Don't make the mistake and think that's the Y-intercept, because it actually says what? X-intercept. The X-intercept and Y-intercept are the same thing, unless it's at the origin. All right, so now what we'd have to do, find the slope. So the slope equals, let's call this x1, y1, x2, y2. What's y2? Subtract 5 divided by x2, subtract. What's the numerator? What's the denominator? 8. So there is my slope. Now we're going to go and put this into what formula? Point slope formula. What's the point slope formula? All right, now remember, does it matter which point I use? No, it does not. Now, make things easy on yourself. Which point do you think might be easiest to use? The one that has a 0 in it. That's the one that's going to be easy to use, because what happens? So I'm going to use 5, 0. x1, y1. So I get y minus y1. What's y1?
0.
Equals the slope times x minus 5. So there's your point slope form. That's your point slope form. Now you got to put it in what form? Slope-intercept. Well, what is 5? What is y minus 0? Y. So that's y equal, and then all you do is distribute, and there's your answer. What's negative 5h times x? What's a negative 5 times a, I'm sorry, negative 5h times a negative 5? Not negative. Positive. And there's your answer. Did I have to use a calculator at all? Like I did the other one? No. Because y was already by itself. Y minus 0 is just what? Y. Now if I use the other point, would I need to use a calculator? Yes. Okay? So it makes things a lot easier if you use the one that has 0 as a coordinate. All right, we're going to do one more. Suppose it passes through 2, negative 3, and has x-intercept of negative 2. I don't know the slope, so I've got to find it. So if I'm going to find the slope, I've got to know how many points. 2. When using a slope formula, those points have to be written as an ordered pair. One of them is an ordered pair, the other one's not. If you're having difficulty determining how to write the x-intercept as an ordered pair, then you need to put this on a coordinate plane. So x-intercept negative 2 means right here, right? And then what is that as an ordered pair? Negative 2, 0. Not 0, negative 2, because 0, negative 2 is on which axis? The y-axis. Yes, that's negative 2. Yeah. So write this as negative 2, 0. Now let's find the slope. x1, y1, x2, y2. So the slope equals, what's y2? Subtract negative 3 over if I start with 0, what must I then write down there first? Negative 2. Subtract 2. What's the numerator? What's the denominator? All right. Now let's go back and plug the point and the slope into the point slope formula. What's the point slope formula? Y1 times x minus x1, right? Which point do you want to use? It does not matter which one is going to make it easier for you. The one with a 0 in it. So we're going to use negative 2, 0. So this is your x1, this is your y1. So y minus what? 0 equals the slope. What's the slope? Negative 3/4 times x subtract a, negative 2. Now remember, in my math lab and on one of the worksheets, it is going to ask you to write one of your answers in, one of your equations in point slope form. Is this the one you're going to give me? No, because I need for you to rewrite x subtract negative 2 as x plus 2. So you're going to say y minus 0 equals negative 3/4 times x plus 2. So y minus 0 equals negative 3/4 times x plus 2. One more step and you're done, because y minus 0 is just what? Y. Distribute, what do you get? Minus what? No, negative 3/4 times 2. That's not, negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. So that's negative 6 what? Fourths. But then go ahead and reduce those. So what's that? Negative 3/2. All right. So make sure you can reduce whenever you can. You learned that many years ago how to reduce fractions. All right. So that takes care of that. Okay. All right. Now,